right, it is time for another edition of the Audio Project with Deena Tearney, and I'm very, very honored to have a special guest on today's podcast, Suzanne Basalla. Suzanne is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Japan Council, and the USJC is focused on strengthening U.S.-Japan relations. And I have to say, I'm very impressed with Suzanne's background, including the fact that she was a former officer in the U.S. Navy, also the senior advisor to Ambassador Ruse in Japan. Very, very impressive. Suzanne, thank you so much for taking time and being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Deena.
Great. Well, for our audience, I wanted to ask you to take just a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourself and about the USJC.
Great, thank you. So as you mentioned, I actually got my career started in the Navy and spent 13 years in the Navy as an intelligence officer. So most of my early trips to Hawaii, where you are, were with the Navy, Camp Smith and Pearl Harbor. So Hawaii is a place I'm very fond of from work relations. I'm glad I got to visit it as a tourist later. My career has been a lot of focus on the U.S.-Japan alliance. So I consider myself what we call an alliance manager. And I've worked in the Navy, I've worked at the Pentagon under the Secretary of Defense on Japan issues. As you mentioned, I had an opportunity to work for Ambassador Ruse when he was our ambassador, including after the earthquake, the Great East Japan earthquake, which is really where I became interested in supporting people-to-people connections and understanding that if I cared about strong U.S.-Japan relations, which I do, and I want a strong alliance, then connecting at the people-to-people level is one of the most important ways I can contribute. And so my work through the U.S. Japan Council has allowed me to contribute to those people-to-people connections. I've also had a chance, I'm right now in Silicon Valley. I came out here a few years ago to work for the Toyota Research Institute, which is out here, a tech company looking at what's next for Toyota. But now I'm, as you mentioned, with USJC as the president and CEO.
That's very cool. Tell us, I do want to learn a little bit more about USJC, of course, obviously. Mm-hmm. What really struck me just now, as you were talking, was the people-to-people connection and how you built that. It was a time of crisis. I'm sure there's been other times and moments. And the reason that stuck out to me, and I'm sorry, I'm just going on a little mini tangent, because when I think about what we do, even in technology, we forget people. And we forget that relationships and people are so important. I'd love to get just, your, maybe the short synopsis of how do you help those people-to-people relationships? What's kind of going through your mind, and how do you make good relations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's, I agree with you. It's easy to forget and overlook the role of people-to-people connections. I used to think that everything was at the high levels, what the president says to the prime minister, what the secretary says to the minister, and really came to appreciate that it really actually starts with student connections. And I'll tell you, Deena, how I got to really appreciate the people-to-people connections was, as I mentioned, after the earthquake and tsunami and nuclear disaster, there was such a need to support Japan. There was such an outpouring from everybody in the world to support Japan. And America was particularly well placed to do special support to Japan because we had this network that had been built on students who had visited Japan, young people who had been teachers in Japan on the JET program, doctors and scientists who had done research in Japan, and then people who've served there in the military. So just a number of ways people really felt connected, and through marriage. And one of the unique things about U.S. Japan Council is also through heritage. And we really provide a platform for diverse people to connected to U.S. Japan relations. But a lot of that is through the leadership of the Japanese American community. The council was actually founded by, speaking of Hawaii, Senator Daniel Inouye and his wife, Irene Hirano Inouye, and several other prominent Japanese Americans who saw that there was a whole community of people, particularly in the Japanese American community, who had connections to Japan through family and other professional connections. And we're looking for a way to bring that into support of the U.S.-Japan relationship. So that was actually the kernel that started U.S. Japan Council. We really grew after the earthquake because we got involved in a lot of work to help young people. So tons of our programs are focused on young people in Japan, young people in the United States, up and coming Japanese American leaders, and various other leaders in the relationship. in terms of our programming, we do a range of public education, convenings, webinars now, of course, with COVID. But throughout it all, we're always trying to find ways to bring people together, whether it's business to business or connecting sectors, connecting government to business, to civil society, connecting students to opportunities in their future career. It's really all about the people to people.
That's really cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you about some of your programs, and I'm familiar with USJC, and I've always been impressed by the organization over the years. And our company, we're a member of the Pledge 1%, and our big thing is inspiring youth to pursue careers in technology. And I know that you just mentioned the youth and how things can really start at that level. Can you tell us a little bit more about the youth programs? I'm particularly interested in hearing more about that, and other programs too, but that one particularly.
Yeah, so we started with the Tomodachi Initiative. So when the US supported Japan after the earthquake, tsunami, nuclear disaster, that was called Operation Tomodachi. That was the government's response, really the military response. So Tomodachi Initiative is a partnership between US government and the US Japan Council with support of the Japanese government to continue to support young people. It started with primarily bringing young people from the disaster region to the United States to give them an opportunity to have a global mindset, have opportunities that may not have come to them otherwise, give them hope, and generally develop more global leaders. And the program has, over the last 11 years, expanded. So we bring Japanese from around Japan to the United States and Americans to Japan. And it's so amazing how you can transform a life when you bring them when they're young, exposing them. Some of these kids maybe never even had an opportunity to visit Japan or the United States. And just even a week, perhaps visiting another country will get them to think about different careers, get them to think about language differently. And we've done this for enough time that we've been able to see high school kids who get the confidence to go on and maybe study abroad or to work abroad or to incorporate US Japan into their careers. So that's super exciting. We do programs for all ages. We especially have a program called the Emerging Leaders Program, which is really for mid-20s to around 35. We have a lot of alumni of that program actually in Hawaii who are up and comers, really fantastic leaders. And we give them an opportunity to showcase their leadership, grow their leadership, and engage in the US-Japan relationship in ways to build them as future leaders.
That's really cool. I love that. Now you mentioned Hawaii a lot, but you guys are everywhere. I mean, headquartered in DC, but can you tell us what some of other key areas are, or maybe it's everywhere?
No, we have, as you mentioned, headquarters in DC, and that's really important because we have a close relationship with many folks in both governments, Tokyo and Washington, D.C. And so that presence in D.C. is really important for us as a headquarters. But we have members around the country and in Japan, and especially in areas like where there's a lot of connections to US Japan. So Hawaii, Los Angeles, where I am here in the Bay Area, New York, so Chicago actually, and often where there's a strong Seattle group of Japanese American leaders. We also have an entity in Japan, and we have a staff in Japan that supports them. We've always had a few remote staff members that we've integrated into our team, but because of COVID, we've really embraced a dispersed workforce, and we've been able to hire talent across the country that we would normally not have considered, right? Because we felt like they had to be able to work in Washington, D.C. or Tokyo. So now our staff is in many locations across the country, as well as in Japan.
That's awesome. That's very cool. I was wondering, when you think back on, there's a number of programs that you just went through and you've been part of the organization for a long time. What's maybe a highlight or, a really great memorable moment that you've had during your time leading USJC or even just being a part of USJC?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, last year, we were really trying to think about how we can make an impact on climate and sustainability, right? That's one of the most important issues for everybody in the world. We know that US and Japan have a lot to contribute on those issues. And we had reached out to the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, and asked if he would record a message for a program we were doing. And through these discussions, it turned into an hour-long dialogue between Secretary Kerry and his counterpart in Japan. And I was privileged to moderate it. And it was a little scary. I had to do it at 5 a.m. here to make the time zones work. And I learned a lot in the process, but to have us be part of that conversation actually helped bringing these two important leaders together for a dialogue about what our two countries can do. It was really, really exciting. But truth be told, often the big shot in the arm that I get is the small ways that we're able to connect people. And that might lead to somebody getting a job. It might lead to a business opportunity. It might lead to a sale. It might lead to someone finding a mentor. It might lead to someone making a different education or career decision. And those small connections are really the heart of people-to-people ties. And I get an inordinate amount of joy when we are able to find those connections and make them among people.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really cool. That's actually one of the reasons we like the youth programs, that we get involved in, is that moment where you're like, wow, I don't know if I get more joy or this other person does, because I can their, like you said, their new perspective, and especially internationally, like, wow, what great perspective to have, and to take you into whatever chapter that rolls into or navigates you down a path that you otherwise wouldn't have had it not been for an organization like USJC. So that's super cool. Yeah. You mentioned climate change. It's funny. I've been, there's a new product. I'm going to do a shameless plug right now because you mentioned it and it's in my head. Salesforce launched recently a product called Net Zero Cloud, where they really talk about reporting all of that. And it's been really interesting to see how, like you said, I think people are more aware, and people are more thinking about the impact that they're having and how to measure that and to drive change. So how amazing that you were part of bringing that conversation together.
Yeah. There's still a lot of work to do, though, as I wanted to jump on to talking about young people. I mean, another program that we have that's really special is called the Toshizo Watanabe Scholarship. And, you want to talk about people-to-people connections. Mr. Watanabe, when he was growing up in Japan, he had a single mother. Things were a little bit challenging for his family. And he got a scholarship to go study in the United States. And that became part of who he was. And he's become an extremely successful businessman in both the United States and Japan. So he created an endowed scholarship to support Japanese and American college students going to each other's countries to study abroad. And he has made those opportunities available to so many young people just by seeing how much it transformed his own life and then making that opportunity. And he really prioritizes, through this program, we really prioritize young people who've had to overcome socioeconomic barriers. And he has subsequently funded another scholarship program to bring high school students from Japan to the United States for a short time. We're just doing that for the first time soon. And the idea there is to expose them even younger so that they can make some choices that makes it even more possible for them to study abroad in the future. So to me, that is just a perfect example of people-to-people connections.
Yeah, love it. What an example for others too, and to spread his influence, I guess you could say, or the experience that he had to influence and help others. That's really cool. And obviously, I mean, I'm going to say you're a big inspiration too, because your career background, I think, with the international stuff is probably a shining example for others, especially young women looking at business leaders. So great job there too.
Thank you.
Wanted to switch gears a little bit because I know we were talking about Salesforce for USJC. When did we've helped you, we've worked with you guys recently at the USJC, which has been a great honor. Thank you for allowing that. Yeah. And I guess I'm curious, just for our audience, because we have some technology people too. And how do you realize as a business leader, when did you maybe realize that Salesforce was a solution that could help you grow and expand the impact of USJC?
So I worked at USJC earlier before I came back as the president and CEO. And at that time, I was the EVP and COO. And I saw so much of like why we needed Salesforce just to track information. But I have to say, I saw it even more when I came back in the leadership role, because in the end, an organization that is based on connecting people, right? You have to track that information, right? And otherwise it just stays in the head of a few people, you know, what somebody's background is, what their interests are, what their needs are. So Salesforce is a mechanism for us to, you know, document and have the sort of historical knowledge of key information about people who support us, especially our sponsors, and how we can continue to engage them in a way that will provide value to them. And what we're hoping to be able to do is to use Salesforce to even further allow us to find connections that are win-wins within the community. One of the things that we started doing during COVID, in the past, USJC focused more on in-person activities. We have this big annual conference every year, and then otherwise there's regional activities. Great formula, except for obviously during a pandemic. And so during the pandemic, we were looking for different ways to connect virtually. And it didn't make sense to only connect our Hawaii people when you're on Zoom. So we started finding different ways to connect, like people who are leaders of Japanese and Japanese American related nonprofits, or artists, and bring them together, or educators. And bring those communities together from across our membership, which is across the United States and Japan. Those kinds of connections that we're trying to build and mapping that network requires a way to organize the information and to allow that to be something you can share across the organization. And we have folks who focus on development and relations with our corporate sponsors. And we have membership who do membership programming. And if their knowledge about relationships is in those silos, we can't be effective and we can't make the connections we need to. The other thing is people move around, right? And being able to keep track of that and continue to keep them in our network is what keeps the network fun and healthy and vibrant. Otherwise, you just lose track of people. And we care about people, not just because the jobs that they're in, but because of the way they engage with the council. So we really want to follow people as much as we can where they go in their careers, and not just say goodbye to them because they're no longer in a particular position.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for that. And, you know, that's a really awesome example that you gave about using that data to almost create new communities of people, introduce people to others and connect them. And you wouldn't have known, you know, that kind of thing unless you kind of pull that data together. And I love that you guys are creating communities, like just, yeah, especially during pandemic. That was a rough, you know, patch. So I think it's a great way to leverage data to build even more, you know, with more connection around commonality. So very cool idea. Well, you know, I'm actually half Japanese. I'm an American. I've been involved in USJC. I've been to, you know, several of your events. I've been to 2 conferences. I went to the conference in Honolulu, Tokyo, I think when it went to Tokyo. So I'm anxious to get back involved as those things are starting to come back to life. And of course, I must say, you know, I'm not only impressed with you, but the work of USJC, everything I've ever been to, always super well done. The membership, top notch. The speakers of the conference are amazing. And of course, I love you leveraging Salesforce too to help accelerate that mission. But wow, what a really awesome organization. All right. Well, Suzanne, if you don't mind me asking, I would love to know how was your experience working with the Pacific Point team on your Salesforce project?
Oh, I'm happy to talk about that, Deena. And thank you for you and your team being so wonderful to work with. And I also really want to thank Central Pacific Bank and their foundation for connecting us and making it possible for us to work together on this project. You know, your team and you know, working with you has been a delight. And, you know, we've been working in the past with the resources that are available to us as a nonprofit and kind of trying to, I think a lot of nonprofits do this, try to scrape by and teach yourself, you know, as much as you can yourselves. And working with a consulting firm, you know, that knows Salesforce, knows what it can do, isn't limited by we're really limited by our knowledge, and you're able to help us see things that we didn't even think we could do with Salesforce, and help us figure out, in our case, we already had Salesforce. So there was a little bit, as you know, work to kind of detangle what we had and clean it up, and then make it more operational. So working with you has taken us to a level we couldn't go on our own. Your team is also just very good at being able to explain things at the high level, and then also go in and work at the details, but not doing it in a way that makes it overcomplicated for us so that we can't sustain it in the future. I think that's been, the kind of the sweet spot is helping us, but doing it in a way that is not going to tie us to having to stay with consultants for the rest of our Salesforce life, but giving us the tools and the confidence, to be able to move forward. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for saying that. And it was great to work with your team. And I think what makes a difference a lot of times on a Salesforce project, honestly, is who we work with and our customers too. They play a huge role in it. It's sometimes viewed as like a one-side thing with us doing our piece, but you guys were always responsive and always providing the information that we needed so that we could essentially, help empower you to be in that position. So I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Deena, I mean, it's true that Salesforce was like just a conversation killer before we started working with Pacific Point. Like nobody, like crickets, like whenever you want to talk about doing anything with Salesforce. And honestly, the team that's been working with Dan and with you, they're enthusiastic about Salesforce. They're champions for it. They're ambassadors for it. And it's such a different atmosphere in the office when people talk about Salesforce with a sense of promise. So thank you for that.
Great. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, there's several, I'm going to say one small thing about just kind of nonprofits that we've worked with in Salesforce, just because, for our audience that might be looking at that and maybe as a nonprofit, I think the common use case is the contact management, kind of keeping track of that, all that data around your contacts. But Salesforce is such a powerful tool. And I think some not-for-profits, sometimes they think of it just in the context of that. And I think your team's starting to really look beyond and really already seeing the opportunities. And I would encourage other not-for-profits too to realize that platform that you have can really start to help you scale into programs, manage them more efficiently, and start to leverage the other features of Salesforce, because there's a lot there. And so, yeah, and then, your team, in your case, your team has been very awesome to pick things up, because if you could put the time forward and your team has, it's not unreasonable for your own teams to take it over. So maybe for our audience, can you share how could someone get plugged in or get involved, or what are some cool things that our audience should know about USJC?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all those wonderful comments, Deena. That's makes my heart sing. So the first thing people can do is sign up for our newsletter and, get information. We do a lot of events that are available to the public, and that's the best way to find out. And, you can't go to everything. We try to share information in the newsletter as well, and celebrate a lot of our members. I think through the newsletter, you can also get a sense of the organization and our membership. So that would be the first thing. For organizations that are interested in supporting the council through financial support and sponsorships, please reach out. We definitely would be interested to talk to you about what's involved in sponsoring USJC. For individuals, again, after they get to know the council and attend a few events, and if they feel that that's the council's mission really resonates with their own values and interests, we have a nomination process, and it's not too onerous, but we really ask that somebody who's already a member of the council get to know that person, and then nominate them and put them through the process. It takes a little bit of time, but we just really try to ensure that everybody who becomes part of the council, understands the mission, and is supportive of that. That's part of how we keep the really great quality of our members. And keep the network, really people feel very trusted in the network. If you don't know anybody in USJC and you're still really interested, there's information on the website on how to reach out to our membership team. And often what we'll do is introduce you to a member in the local region that can start the conversations. But like I said, getting on our newsletter is absolutely the best place to start.
That's great. That's awesome. So this year the conference is in Tokyo,
Yes,
right?
in Tokyo.
That'll be exciting. Are you guys having a certain size? Or are you guys going to open that? Can you tell us a little bit more about conference expectations?
Yeah, so the conference will be in Shibuya, which is a super exciting. Talk about tech, super exciting. You would have gone there if you went to our conference in Tokyo in the past. It'll be the same venue, the Cerulean Hotel. It's open to the public. Members get a members discount. And it'll be October 27th and 28th. And we know there are a lot of questions right now about travel to Japan, and we're working our way through that. But we're optimistic and encouraging people to sign up for the conference. And in addition to our public programming, which will be all day on the 28th, great speakers, we have some top-notch business leaders and government leaders, and we'll have breakout sessions on topics like women's leadership and art and the security relationship, like a whole variety of topics that we'll be looking at. We also have some activities beforehand and afterwards. So networking dinners, optional excursions to travel elsewhere in Japan. So we're really looking forward. It's been 3 years. It will have been 3 years when we had that conference in Japan since we've met in person for an annual conference. And we're just delighted to have the chance to bring people together.
Yeah, that sounds super fun. Yeah, being in tech, I tend to prioritize a lot of our the conference time I spend, because there's so many great conferences, but for a non-tech conference, yours is like all the way up at the top. I only go to Dreamforce really anymore because of just that. So it's like Dreamforce and USJC, those are my top two interest areas. So
I think what's fun about USJC too is that we do such a variety of topics that I hope that everybody comes and has a chance to learn something about an area that is not their primary focus area, but because of the dynamics of the council, they have a chance to learn about it. And then truly, if you've been there, someone calls it a USJC shower, but it's just this energy compared to a lot of conferences, maybe not compared to a tech conference, but compared to a lot of Japan conferences, we skew much younger, much more diverse in terms of backgrounds, and more women will be there than often a typical Japanese conference. So great energy.
And you don't have to speak Japanese to be able to go. So in case anybody's worried, because I have a little bit of Japanese knowledge, but in terms of language, but yeah, definitely some work there. But yeah, I would agree that that's actually the main reason that I feel like when I did go, and then there was times in my life, over the course of, building a business, you get busier and you're trying to prioritize your time, and looking at conferences that you go to, that one was like, oh, I really should keep this. Then the reason why, to be honest, is because it opens up your thinking a little bit to different things that you're not normally going to think about, and you get a different perspective and international business topics, and not to mention lots of inspirational things too. But I felt like when I've gone in the past, and I went to the last one in Japan, and it was awesome. And I felt like it really, it just gives you fresh perspective. So anyways, I highly recommend this conference. It's great. Well, okay. So in closing, I have a question of the day for you, because you are an expert here, I'm imagining, but what is your favorite thing to do in Japan that you could share with our audience?
Yeah. So for people who've spent a lot of time in Japan, or maybe even if you're new to Japan, I think the one thing that's kind of fascinating about Japan is you don't have to do anything. You just want to be there. You just walk around and everything's just different, but lovely, right? And the hospitality and the attention to detail. So I don't really ever feel like I have to do something. Very happy to be there. That said, if I had to think about something that's really different that I can only do in Japan, it would be, and I don't do it often enough, but to go to an onsen, to a hot spring, especially to get out of the city, somewhere in the mountains. And there's so many like affordable, accessible onsen that you can go to and just sit in the hot water, maybe out in nature, with friends, enjoy some seafood. And anyway, that's kind of, I guess, my happy place in Japan is going to a hot spring.
That's a really good one. And I like that one because too, like, I feel like the Japanese culture has so much appreciation for nature. So that's just right in there with how they can really just build something around that. So, Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you again soon, maybe at the conference, we'll see, or maybe sometime
Yeah,
in Hawaii.
I hope so.
But
Thank you.
yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Deena, and thank you and Pacific Point for everything you've done to help us level up our Salesforce. It makes a huge difference.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, it was a real pleasure to work with you and your team.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.